The desert is silent at night. Only the faint breath of wind moves across the endless sands, carrying with it a cool whisper that once brushed the faces of kings, priests, and farmers alike. Beneath the same canopy of stars that we see today, an ancient river glimmers in the moonlight, patient, eternal, unchanged. This is the Nile, the heartbeat of Egypt. For thousands of years, it has carried silt and song, both life and legend, down its long spine of green, through a world of gold and dust. On its banks, one of humanity's oldest stories began, the story of how we learned to live with time itself. The Egypt we remember today, of temples and pyramids, gods and mummies, was not merely a civilization. It was a conversation between people and eternity. The Egyptians were obsessed not with death, but with continuity. How the soul might endure as the body withered, how the name might echo even when the voice was gone. Every grain of sand, every carved stone, was part of that dialogue with forever. But before there were pharaohs, before hieroglyphs were etched on temple walls, there was only the river, rising and falling with the breath of the earth. It flooded the valley every year, spreading dark, fertile soil across the plains. That rhythm became the measure of all things: birth, labor, harvest, death, and renewal. The Nile was both compass and clock. To live by it was to live inside a cycle, a gentle, predictable pulse in an unpredictable world. It is here, in this quiet rhythm, that Egypt's soul took shape. When the sun rose over the eastern desert, it was not just another dawn. To the Egyptians, it was the god Ra sailing his golden bark across the heavens, reborn after his nightly journey through darkness. When the sun set, it did not die. It descended into the underworld, to battle chaos and rise again. Life and death were not opposites, but twins, forever intertwined. This way of seeing, cyclical, eternal, would shape everything they built. The pyramids were not tombs, they were engines of resurrection. The temples were not mere monuments, they were conversations with gods. Even language became sacred. To write a name was to keep a soul alive. And yet, for all their grandeur, the people of ancient Egypt were deeply human. In fragments of papyrus and letters, we hear their worries and hopes. A farmer pleading for fair grain measures, a mother praying for her child's safety, a scribe writing poems about love and loneliness under the same stars we see tonight. Time, in Egypt, was not something that passed. It was something one could join. Imagine the scene, 5,000 years ago, the first rays of sun spreading over the valley, painting the river in molten gold. In the distance, smoke rises from small clay houses. Fishermen push their narrow boats into the water. Oxen drag wooden plows through the damp soil. Priests stand on temple terraces, lifting their arms toward the sky, greeting the sun with hymns that speak of renewal. In this moment, all layers of Egyptian history overlap. The living and the dead, the gods and the kings, the common and the divine. The Nile binds them all. To understand Egypt is to understand that everything here moves in circles. The river's flood, the sun's return, the pharaoh's rebirth. It is a land where memory refuses to fade. Over the next 2 hours, we will walk together along that river, from its earliest villages to the marble halls of Cleopatra's Alexandria. We will meet kings who dreamed of eternity and workers who built it with their bare hands. We will witness collapse and rebirth, conquest and endurance. And through it all, we will return, again and again, to the same sound, the soft murmur of the Nile at night, a lullaby older than any empire. So close your eyes. Let the sands of Egypt rise before you. Let the voices of the past speak once more. Our journey begins where all journeys in Egypt begin, beside the eternal river. Before we begin our journey through the golden sands of time, take a quiet moment to join us. Subscribe so you'll never miss another night story, where history drifts like a dream, and every ancient voice still speaks. Now, close your eyes, breathe with the river, and let Egypt rise once more. Before there was Egypt, there was the river. Long before the pyramids rose, before stone was carved into the likeness of gods, the Nile was already at work, cutting its green thread through the heart of the desert. Every year, like clockwork, its waters rose and fell, breathing life into a landscape that should have been barren. From the first floods came the first seeds, from the first seeds, the first homes, and from those homes, a civilization that would one day call itself Kemet, the Black Land, named for the rich soil left behind when the waters receded. The gift of the river. The Greek historian Herodotus would later write, Egypt is the gift of the Nile. He was right, though he could never have imagined just how deeply that gift shaped every heartbeat of Egyptian life. The Nile was not a single simple stream, it was a complex organism. The White Nile, flowing north from the highlands of East Africa, the Blue Nile surging from the mountains of Ethiopia, and the Atbara, carrying storm-fed waters from distant hills. These tributaries joined in the Sudanese plains and journeyed north through desert and delta, spilling finally into the Mediterranean, a ribbon of green unfurling through gold. Each year, between June and September, rains far to the south caused the river to swell. It rose in Egypt in late summer, spilling across its banks, flooding fields and villages alike. And when it withdrew, it left behind a layer of dark, fertile silt, a gift renewed with every cycle. To the Egyptians, this was not mere nature. It was the rhythm of divine order. Mahat, the principle of balance, harmony, and justice that held the world together. When the floods came on time, Mahat prevailed. When they failed, chaos, Isfet, crept in. Even the Pharaoh, the most powerful man on earth, was judged by his ability to maintain Mahat, to ensure the river flowed as it should. The Nile dictated everything, where people lived, what they grew, when they harvested, how they prayed. It was a calendar, a god, and a highway all in one. Villages hugged its banks in a long, narrow ribbon, rarely more than a few kilometers wide. Beyond that green edge lay the Deshret, the Red Land, where nothing lived but stone and silence. And so, between life and death, between water and sand, the Egyptians built their world. A geography of faith. To the Egyptians, geography itself was sacred. The world was not random, it was designed with purpose. The east, where the sun rose, symbolized birth and renewal. The west, where it set, belonged to the dead, the realm of dusk and departure. That is why almost every ancient tomb lies on the west bank of the Nile, facing east. The dead, like the sun, would rise again. The living farmed and prayed on the eastern side, while the necropolises, vast cities of the dead, stood across the river, quiet and golden in the setting sun. The river, then, was a bridge between worlds, the living and the dead, order and chaos, time and eternity. The three lands. Egypt's geography can be divided into three great regions: the delta, the valley, and the deserts. In the north, the Nile branched into a wide fan before meeting the Mediterranean. The delta, a vast expanse of marshes and fertile plains. It was Egypt's breadbasket, where farmers grew barley, emmer wheat, flax, and vegetables. It was also a place of hidden channels and winding waterways, a labyrinth of life. South of the delta stretched the Nile Valley, the heart of ancient Egypt. Here, narrow strips of green hugged the river for more than 1,000 kilometers between steep cliffs of limestone and sandstone. The valley was Egypt's spine, where most cities, temples, and monuments would rise. Beyond lay the deserts, the western desert stretching toward Libya, filled with oases like Siwa and Bahariya, and the eastern desert, a rugged, mountainous land that led to the Red Sea. Far from lifeless, these deserts held gold mines, quarries, and sacred routes for caravans. The Egyptians did not fear them. They respected them, seeing in their emptiness the dwelling places of gods and spirits. The rhythm of life. The Nile gave Egypt a structure that defined not only its geography, but its sense of time. The year was divided into 3 seasons. Akhet, the season of inundation, June-September, when the floods covered the land. Pere, the season of emergence, October-February, when the waters receded and crops were planted. Shamu, the season of harvest, March-May, when the fields turned gold beneath the sun. This cycle repeated endlessly, predictable and dependable. While other ancient peoples feared the unpredictability of their environment, the Egyptians saw stability, permanence, and divine order. Their gods were reflections of that, steady, cyclical, eternal. Farmers worked according to this rhythm. They plowed with wooden tools, guided oxen, and irrigated their fields with canals and shadufs, simple levers for lifting water. Their homes were built from mud brick, cool and practical. Their lives were simple but profoundly connected to nature. And always, above all, they gave thanks to the river. Hymns to the Nile, written over 4,000 years ago, praise it as both father and mother, as creator and sustainer. Hail to you, O Nile, who comes forth from the earth, who brings life to Egypt. You give drink to the thirsty fields. You make every home rejoice. The tone of those hymns is tender, intimate, not fear, but gratitude. The Egyptians did not worship the river out of terror. They loved it as one loves a parent. The birth of settlements. Archaeologists trace Egypt's earliest settlements to around 6000 BCE. Small communities of farmers and herders clustered along the riverbanks, their lives bound to its moods. They made pottery, tamed animals, and learned to store grain. Over time, these villages grew into small kingdoms, each ruled by a local chief. The people developed irrigation systems, measured the floods, and began to mark time with lunar calendars. Trade expanded. Obsidian, copper, and lapis lazuli moved along the river. The first hieroglyphs appeared, scratched onto pots and tags. Simple signs of ownership, perhaps, but the beginning of something miraculous. Written language. And in that writing, one begins to glimpse the Egyptian soul. Ordered, precise, eternal. The meaning of balance. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about early Egypt is not its monuments, but its mindset. Surrounded by deserts and blessed by the river, Egyptians learned that survival depended on harmony. Everything had to be balanced: life and death, flood and drought, order and chaos. This philosophy would shape their art, religion, and politics. Even the architecture of their temples mirrored this principle: symmetry, proportion, and alignment with the stars. To an Egyptian, beauty and truth were the same thing, both expressions of balance. The promise of civilization. By 4000 BCE, Egypt was ready for something extraordinary. In the north and south, 2 great regions, Lower and Upper Egypt, began to emerge. Each had its own symbols, crowns, and gods. The north revered the cobra goddess Wadjet, the south, the vulture goddess Nekbet. For centuries they coexisted, sometimes rivals, sometimes allies. But in time, the dream of unification would rise, carried by a man whose name would echo through eternity: Narmer, the first pharaoh. He would bring together the 2 lands, forging a single kingdom that would endure for more than 3,000 years. But that, as every Egyptian story does, begins with the river, the eternal giver, the patient teacher, the quiet thread of life. And so the story flows onward, from the waters of creation to the birth of kings. Before Egypt became an empire of gold and granite, it was a dream taking shape along the banks of the Nile, a patchwork of small kingdoms, each ruled by a local chief who claimed descent from the gods. They built shrines of mud brick, raised cattle, and offered grain to spirits of the land. But among them stirred a vision that the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, divided by distance and culture, might one day breathe as one. The dream of unification. Around 3100 BCE, the landscape of Egypt was changing. To the south, in Upper Egypt, a kingdom centered around the city of Nekhen, or Hierakonpolis, was growing powerful. Its kings wore the white crown, symbol of the southern realm. To the north, in the wide delta, the red crown ruled the fertile lowlands. Between them lay a long corridor of river and sand, the stage on which the first great act of Egyptian history would unfold. From this time comes one of archaeology's most haunting treasures, the Narmer palette. A slab of dark green siltstone carved over 5,000 years ago, it tells a story without words, a story of unity, power, and divine kingship. On one side, the king, wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, strikes down an enemy. On the other, he wears the red crown of Lower Egypt, leading a triumphal procession. Above him, the falcon god Horus holds a rope tied around the head of a captive, the symbol of conquered lands. Whether Narmer truly united Egypt through war or through diplomacy, we may never know. But the palette captures the idea that mattered most, that Egypt was now one, Simatawi, the union of the two lands. From this moment, the Egyptian state was born. The invention of the pharaoh. With unification came something entirely new, the concept of divine kingship. The ruler of Egypt was no longer a chief, or even a king in the ordinary sense. He was Nesubiti, he of the sedge and the bee, lord of both Upper and Lower Egypt. He was also the living Horus, embodiment of the falcon god who ruled the sky. His duty was not only to govern, but to uphold Ma'at, the cosmic order of truth, balance, and justice. The pharaoh was the axis of the world. Through him, the Nile flooded, the sun rose, and the stars moved in harmony. His crown was not merely a symbol, it was a responsibility. The promise that Egypt would remain whole. To ensure that promise, the early pharaohs built cities, temples, and tombs along the river's edge. They sent officials to measure land, collect taxes, and record offerings. They began the long tradition of bureaucracy that would define Egyptian civilization for millennia. A new kind of writing. It was in these first dynasties that writing evolved from simple signs into full hieroglyphic script, a language of images and ideas. Each symbol carried both sound and meaning: an owl for the letter M, a reed for I, a seated man for A. Together, they formed words, prayers, and royal names. To carve a name was to make it eternal. The Egyptians believed that to erase a name was to kill a soul. The earliest inscriptions, found on ivory tags, jars, and labels from tombs at Abydos, recorded offerings, inventory, and royal titles. But even in their simplicity, these carvings are breathtaking, tiny, deliberate, beautiful. They reveal not just information, but reverence. The act of writing was sacred. Through writing, the Egyptians began to bind memory into stone. Time itself, they believed, could now be preserved. The city of the dead. At the center of early Egyptian power stood Abydos, a holy city in Upper Egypt. It was both capital and necropolis, the place where kings ruled and where they returned to rest. Here, archaeologists have found the tombs of Egypt's first dynasties, long rectangular pits lined with mud brick, filled with goods for the afterlife, pottery, tools, furniture, jewelry, and sometimes the bodies of servants who followed their masters into eternity. These burials reveal a belief system already fully formed. Death was not an end, but a transition. The king would rise again, sailing with the gods across the heavens. To ensure his journey, rituals were performed, food was offered, and his name was inscribed on stone stelae. Over time, the idea of sacrifice gave way to symbolism. Clay models replaced human attendants, and the tomb became a microcosm of paradise. Even in these earliest centuries, the Egyptian obsession with life beyond death, ordered, eternal, serene, had already taken root. Kings of the first and second dynasties. After Nama came a line of rulers, Horaha, Jer, Jet, Den, and others whose names shimmer faintly in the mists of prehistory. Each built on the foundation of unity, strengthening Egypt's institutions, defining its symbols, and codifying its rituals. King Den, in particular, stands out. His tomb at Abydos contained stairways, storage chambers, and finely crafted objects. The first glimpse of architectural ambition that would one day culminate in the pyramids. In inscriptions, Den appears wearing the double crown, symbolizing his dominion over both lands, a visual affirmation of unity. Under these early kings, Egypt began to organize itself into a complex state. Officials managed irrigation systems and food storage. Scribes kept records. Artisans crafted ceremonial objects of remarkable skill. Ivory combs, stone vessels, and jewelry that still glimmer with timeless elegance. Trade expanded beyond the Nile Valley. Egyptian boats sailed south into Nubia for gold and ivory, east into the Sinai for copper and turquoise, and north across the Mediterranean for cedar from Lebanon. The Nile became not just a river, but a highway of ideas. The shape of power. The pharaoh's authority rested on ritual as much as on might. Every action, from the laying of a foundation stone to the offering of bread, had cosmic meaning. To act was to maintain order. To neglect was to invite chaos. At the dawn of Egypt's history, this belief gave birth to something extraordinary, a civilization built on faith in continuity. Other kingdoms rose and fell with the fortunes of war or the will of kings. Egypt endured because it believed the universe itself depended on its balance. The pharaoh stood at the center of that balance. His palace was both court and temple. His word was both law and prayer. His body was human, but his role was divine. Even the imagery of kingship reflected this duality. The crook and flail, symbols of care and discipline. The false beard, sign of divine authority. The cobra and vulture on the brow, guardians of Upper and Lower Egypt. These icons, established in the early dynastic period, would remain unchanged for 3,000 years. Craftsmanship and order. Egypt's artisans were not anonymous laborers. They were keepers of cosmic precision. In every carving, line, and proportion lay a quiet philosophy. That beauty mirrored truth. From this time survive exquisite carvings of animals and kings, crafted from ivory, slate, and gold. Each follows a clear geometry, balanced and intentional. The same proportional canon that would later shape colossal statues was already in place. Even architecture followed ritual logic. Palaces and temples were aligned with the stars, tombs oriented to the west, and capitals mirrored celestial order. To build was to participate in the harmony of creation. A glimpse of the ordinary. Though our surviving records focus on kings, fragments of early settlements offer glimpses of ordinary life. Houses were made of mud brick, small, cool, and efficient. Pottery was both practical and beautiful. Villagers gathered around communal ovens and wells. Men wore linen kilts. Women, sheath dresses held by straps. Children played beside the river, watched by cats, already sacred companions. The air smelled of bread and fish, the hum of daily life echoing the same rhythms as the floods. The people lived simply, but not crudely. They understood the Nile, the soil, the sun. Their calendars were marked by stars, their songs by seasons. Each harvest was an act of faith that the world, in its quiet cycles, would continue. The birth of memory. By the end of the Second Dynasty, Egypt had already accomplished what few civilizations ever would: stability. Power passed from one ruler to the next with ceremony and continuity. The idea of the afterlife, the written word, and divine kingship all were in place. It was as though, having learned to master the river, the Egyptians had learned to master time. Each pharaoh added a chapter to the eternal Book of Kings, their names carved in serech frames, surmounted by the falcon of Horus. These were not mere records. They were threads in a tapestry woven to last forever. The kings of the early dynastic period may seem distant, their faces lost, their temples buried, yet their legacy endures in every stone laid after them. They taught Egypt how to organize itself, how to believe in balance, and how to express eternity through form. Toward the age of stone, as the Second Dynasty gave way to the Third, Egypt stood on the threshold of a new age. The art of building, once confined to mud brick, would soon reach for the heavens. The concept of kingship, once symbolic, would soon take monumental form. In the deserts near Memphis, a man named Imhotep, architect, priest, and physician, would design something no one had ever seen before: a tomb not of clay, but of stone. His king, Djoser, would become the first to ascend to eternity upon a pyramid of steps. The age of the pyramids was dawning. But before the limestone gleamed, before the sands were carved into perfection, Egypt had already discovered its greatest truth. That harmony between heaven and earth, life and death, order and chaos, is the foundation upon which eternity is built. And so, from the dreams of the first pharaohs, Egypt stepped into the sunlight of its golden age, the Old Kingdom, the Age of Pyramids. There are moments in history when a civilization seems to touch the edge of eternity. For Egypt, that moment came with the Old Kingdom, a time when stone began to speak and humanity learned to build for the gods. Between 2680 and 2180 BCE, Egypt transformed from a river kingdom into a cosmic vision carved in limestone. The kings of this era, Djoser, Sneferu, Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure, built monuments so vast that even today they seem less the work of men than of gods who chose to remember themselves in stone. But to understand the pyramids, we must first return to the beginning, to one man, one idea, and one prayer for eternity. Imhotep and the Step Pyramid. The story begins in the reign of King Djoser, founder of the Third Dynasty. His name meant the Sacred One, and under his rule, Egypt flourished. Crops filled the granaries, trade reached distant lands, and order, Ma'at, reigned supreme. But Djoser, like all kings, faced the question that haunted every mortal soul: how does one conquer death? His answer came through his architect and priest, Imhotep, one of the most brilliant minds of the ancient world. Imhotep was no ordinary builder. He was a philosopher of stone, a scientist of eternity. Where others saw clay and wood, he saw permanence. At Saqqara, near the capital Memphis, Imhotep conceived a monument unlike any before. Instead of a simple mastaba, the flat-roofed tombs of earlier kings, he envisioned a structure that rose toward the heavens, each level smaller than the one below, like a staircase for the soul. It would be Egypt's first pyramid, a step pyramid, built of solid limestone. Imagine the scene: thousands of workers quarrying stone under the desert sun, hauling blocks with ropes and sledges, chanting hymns to the rhythm of drums. Dust rises like mist. The air hums with purpose. Bit by bit, the monument grows. 6 terraces stacked in perfect harmony, reaching over 60 meters high. When it was finished, it gleamed pale gold in the sunlight, visible for miles across the sands. Beneath it stretched a vast labyrinth of chambers and corridors, lined with blue tiles and carved reliefs. The king's sarcophagus lay deep within, surrounded by offerings: food, wine, and statues of servants ready to serve him in eternity. The Step Pyramid of Djoser was not just a tomb, it was a revelation. For the first time, humanity had shaped the landscape to mirror the heavens. Imhotep, the visionary behind it, would later be deified, worshipped as the god of wisdom and healing. His creation marked the birth of monumental architecture, and with it, the birth of Egypt's golden age. Sneferu, the perfection of the form. After Djoser came kings who dreamed even greater dreams. Among them, Sneferu, founder of the Fourth Dynasty, stands apart, the true father of the classic pyramid. Sneferu was a visionary, both builder and poet. In his reign, Egypt knew prosperity and peace. Trade routes stretched to Nubia and Lebanon. Artists flourished, and architects experimented with new forms. At first, Sneferu followed Djoser's model, constructing the Maiden Pyramid, a grand project that would test the limits of stone. But its sides, once stepped, were smoothed into a true pyramid, and in that transformation, something went wrong. The outer casing collapsed, leaving behind a ghostly tower that still rises from the desert like a broken stairway to heaven. Undeterred, Sneferu began again at Dashur, building what we now call the Bent Pyramid. Its lower slope rises steeply, but midway, the angle changes sharply, an architectural adjustment perhaps to prevent collapse. The result is unique, graceful, and oddly human, a monument that wears its mistakes with quiet dignity. But Sneferu was not satisfied. He built once more the Red Pyramid, named for the pink limestone that glows in the sun like dying fire. It was Egypt's first successful smooth-sided pyramid, and the model for all that would follow. When Sneferu died, his son Khufu inherited not only a stable kingdom, but an architectural blueprint for eternity. Khufu and the Great Pyramid of Giza. There are monuments that belong to history, and there are monuments that belong to myth. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is both. At Giza, on a plateau of golden limestone overlooking the Nile, Khufu ordered a structure of unimaginable scale. A pyramid, 146 meters high, built from more than 2 million blocks of stone, each weighing several tons. Its base covers 13 acres. Its sides align almost perfectly with the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. Even today, engineers marvel at its precision. The joints between stones are so tight that not even a blade of grass can slip between them. No mortar, no iron, only the discipline of geometry and the labor of thousands. How was it built? That question has haunted scholars for centuries. Theories abound: ramps, levers, scaffolds, counterweights. Yet perhaps the answer lies not in the mechanics, but in the mindset. For the Egyptians, building the pyramid was not an engineering challenge. It was a ritual act, an offering to the gods, a symbol of Ma'at. Each stone was placed with reverence, each line aligned with the stars. The workers were not slaves, as once thought, but skilled laborers, organized into rotating crews, fed and housed near the site. In their labor, they found meaning, a chance to help their king ascend to the heavens. Inside, narrow passageways lead to a series of chambers: the king's chamber, the queen's chamber, and the mysterious grand gallery. The walls are bare, but the silence itself feels sacred. When Khufu's body was placed inside, sealed within layers of stone, it was believed that his soul, his Ka, would rise along the sun's rays to join Ra in the sky. The pyramid's shape itself mirrored that journey, broad at the base, narrowing to a single point of light. For nearly 4,000 years, the Great Pyramid remained the tallest structure ever built by human hands. It still stands, unbroken, its edges softened by time, but its message unchanged: that humanity once dared to reach eternity through symmetry. The builder's world. Beneath the grandeur of the pyramids lay a community of life. Archaeologists have uncovered entire villages built for the workers, bakeries, breweries, workshops, and dormitories. Graffiti found on walls reveal team names like the Drunkards of Menkara or the Friends of Khufu. Humor and pride carved into history. They were not anonymous. They were artisans, masons, carpenters, and boatmen, united by a shared purpose, to build something that would outlast them all. And when the work was done, they buried their own dead near the king's pyramid, a quiet testament that they too belonged to eternity. The Sun Kings of the Fourth Dynasty. After Khufu came his son Khafra, builder of the second Great Pyramid at Giza, and his grandson Menkore, builder of the third. Khafra's pyramid stands slightly smaller but on higher ground, giving the illusion of equality with his father's. At its foot lies the most iconic face of ancient Egypt, the Great Sphinx. Carved directly from the bedrock, the Sphinx combines the body of a lion with the head of a king, most likely Khafra himself. Its gaze is fixed eternally eastward, toward the rising sun. To the Egyptians, it was a guardian of the necropolis, a silent watcher of dawn and dusk, symbol of royal power and divine protection. Beside the pyramids, temples were built for ritual offerings, where priests performed daily rites to sustain the king's soul. Incense burned, hymns rose, and statues were anointed with sacred oils. The pharaoh was not gone. He lived in stone, nourished by the devotion of his people. Menkora, more modest in ambition, built a smaller but exquisitely refined pyramid, its lower casing of red granite gleaming like polished fire. His statues, found near the site, show a warmth and humanity rarely seen in earlier art. The king standing beside his queen, both serene, both immortal. Through these kings, Egypt reached its zenith, a harmony of power, art, and faith unmatched in ancient times. Life beneath the monuments. While kings built for eternity, ordinary Egyptians lived lives of rhythm and simplicity. They woke with the sun, worked the fields, fished, crafted pottery, and cared for families. In small shrines, they prayed to local gods, household deities like Bes, protector of children, or Taweret, the hippo goddess of birth. Art from this period shows scenes of daily life: farmers ploughing, scribes writing, dancers performing, musicians playing harps and flutes. It was not an age of constant ceremony, but of coexistence between sacred and mundane, between the world of gods and the lives of men. Children learned to read from wooden tablets. Scribes copied hymns and tax lists on papyrus. Traders brought goods from far lands, incense from Punt, silver from Byblos, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. The Nile carried it all, as steady as the heartbeat of the land. And above them, the pyramids gleamed, silent reminders that all of life, from fisherman to pharaoh, flowed toward the same horizon. The voice of the dead. From the tombs of nobles and priests come the earliest texts of human introspection, prayers, songs, and confessions carved into walls. Among them are the pyramid texts, inscribed in the late Old Kingdom within royal tombs. These are not mere funerary formulas but poetry, incantations to help the king ascend to the stars. O king, you are this great star, the companion of Orion. May you rise up and sit upon your iron throne among the imperishable ones in the sky. In those lines we hear not superstition, but a yearning as old as humanity. The desire to be remembered, to become light. The decline of the old kingdom. But even golden ages fade. After centuries of stability, the balance began to shift. By the end of the 6th dynasty, under King Pepi II, Egypt's order began to fracture. Pepi reigned for more than 90 years, the longest rule in human history, but his longevity proved a curse. Officials grew powerful, local governors gained independence, and the central authority weakened. The floods became erratic, famine spread, the grand monuments ceased. The pharaoh, once the living god, now seemed distant, unable to restore balance. In the quiet of decline, the people began to ask questions once unthinkable. If the king cannot ensure order, where then does Mahat reside? The Old Kingdom, the age of pyramids, of divine kings and eternal stone, slowly dissolved into uncertainty. Eternal echoes. Yet even in decline, the Old Kingdom left a legacy that would never die. Every later period of Egyptian history, every revival, every renaissance, looked back to this time as the model of perfection. The pyramids became symbols, not only of power, but of cosmic order. Their geometry inspired temples, their texts shaped religion, their spirit haunted the imagination of millennia. The people who built them are gone, their names forgotten, their houses dust. But the stones remain. In their silence, you can still hear the hum of chisels, the rhythm of footsteps, the pulse of faith that once moved a nation. The pyramids were never meant to defy death. They were meant to prove that death could be understood, that through balance, devotion, and craft, the human spirit could join the eternal cycle of the cosmos. As the sun sets over Giza, the last light slides across the faces of the pyramids, gilding them in molten gold. For a moment, it feels as if time itself pauses. The same light that shone on Djoser and Khufu still lingers here, patient and unchanging. The world around them has vanished 100 times, and yet they endure. Calm, measured, eternal. And so ends the Old Kingdom, Egypt's golden morning. Ahead lies darkness, famine, and fragmentation. But from those shadows will rise a new dawn, the Middle Kingdom, and with it, the rediscovery of the Egyptian heart. There are nights in history when even the stars seem to dim, when the certainty of order gives way to silence, and the river itself feels lost. For Egypt, that night came after the long reign of Pepi II. When the old king finally died, sometime around 2180 BCE, he left behind not the steady rhythm of Ma'at, but a land unraveling. The crumbling of order. For more than 4 centuries, Egypt had been unified. One will, one law, one vision stretching from the Delta to the First Cataract. But now, the chain that bound it together began to rust. The floods of the Nile grew unpredictable. Crops failed. The great storage silos emptied. Starvation crept across the villages, quiet and merciless. Without the abundance that had defined Egypt's life, even the gods seemed to turn away. At the same time, the old machinery of power faltered. Local governors, nomarchs, who once served the king, now ruled their provinces like small kingdoms. They built their own tombs, raised their own armies, collected their own taxes. The pharaoh's word no longer carried across the land. In ancient inscriptions, this time is remembered as chaos. A later text, the admonitions of Ipuwer, laments, "Behold, the river is blood, and one drinks from it. The nobles hunger, the poor are filled with joy. Gold and lapis are scattered in the streets." It is poetry, not report, but it captures the mood of an age unmoored. The old world of order, hierarchy, and faith had collapsed into a mirror image of itself. A land-divided Egypt fractured into 2 centers of power. In the north, around Heracleopolis, a line of kings tried to hold the remnants of authority. They ruled from the delta, but their control rarely reached far. In the south, near Thebes, a rising family of local governors began to grow strong. Their land was narrow and poor, but their spirit was fierce. They claimed to serve Ma'at, not chaos, and in time, their vision would restore Egypt. Between them stretched a frontier of shifting alliances, rival armies, and bitter sieges. Cities that had stood for centuries burned, tombs were looted, temples fell silent. For ordinary people, life narrowed to survival, planting, scavenging, praying that the river would rise again. The human voice in the dark. Yet even in this time of collapse, Egypt produced something profoundly human, its first great literature of introspection. From the tombs of the period come texts unlike the grand hymns of the Old Kingdom. These are voices not of kings, but of individuals, weary, uncertain, questioning. One poem, The Dialogue of a Man with His Soul, tells of a man despairing over the world's injustice. He longs for death, but his soul counsels patience, urging him to remember life's sweetness. Follow your heart as long as you live. Put perfume on your head. Let your heart rejoice. For death comes to all, and none who go return. Another text, the Harper's Song, found later inscribed in tombs, carries the same message. Live fully, cherish beauty, for even the greatest monuments crumble. This was new. The Egyptians had always looked toward eternity, but now, for the first time, they looked inward. The collapse of the kingdom had revealed something deeper: the fragility of faith, the humanity behind the mask of divine order. The tombs of the common man. The first intermediate period also democratized death. Without strong central rule, the grand royal tombs ceased. In their place, local officials and commoners began to build smaller, humbler graves. These tombs were personal, decorated not with cosmic scenes, but with moments from daily life. Farmers at work, fishermen casting nets, families feasting. For the first time, the afterlife seemed open to all, not only to kings. Even the gods became more intimate. Regional deities, Montu of Thebes, Hathor of Dendera, Khnum of Elephantine, took on new prominence. Religion spread from the temples into the homes of the people. The idea of Ma'at did not vanish, it adapted. Balance was no longer the duty of one divine ruler, but of everyone. The seeds of renewal. In Thebes, the family of Intef and Mentuhotep rose from local governors to kings. They called themselves kings of Upper and Lower Egypt, though at first they ruled only the south. Their banners bore the symbols of both lands, a promise of reunification yet to come. The Thebans were warriors, but also dreamers. They rebuilt temples, restored irrigation, and honored the old gods. Their hymns speak of duty, not conquest. Mentuhotep II, the greatest of them, would one day march north, defeat the Heracleopolitan rulers, and reunify Egypt around 2055 BCE. But his victory was more than military. It was spiritual. He restored the concept of divine kingship, not as domination, but as stewardship. The pharaoh was once again the heart of Ma'at, but now tempered by humility, reborn from suffering. The lessons of the fall. The first intermediate period lasted less than 2 centuries, but its shadow stretched long. From the ruin of the Old Kingdom, Egypt learned endurance. From chaos, it learned compassion. From despair, it rediscovered faith. No longer was the pharaoh an untouchable god. He was a mortal who must serve the gods and the people alike. Art, literature, and religion would all reflect this new humility. The pyramids had been built to defy death. The new Egypt would be built to embrace life. A quiet dawn. As Mentuhotep II stood before his restored capital, the morning sun rising over Thebes, he must have felt the weight of both ruin and rebirth. The temples echoed once more with hymns. Canals filled, fields turned green. The river, patient and forgiving, flowed again. Egypt had fallen, but Egypt had remembered. And from that memory, the Middle Kingdom would emerge, calmer, wiser, and more human than before. The sands had swallowed an age of stone, but in their shifting silence the seeds of renewal stirred. The Nile would rise again, and with it, the heart of Egypt. When dawn finally broke over the ruins of the Old Kingdom, it was not with the blinding light of conquest, but with the soft glow of renewal. The age of the Great Pyramids was gone. The pharaohs no longer sought immortality through colossal stone, but through wisdom, harmony, and the rediscovery of what it meant to be human. This was the Middle Kingdom, Egypt's second great flowering, and many later generations would look back on it as the true classical age, when balance was restored and the heart of Egypt beat steady once more. Mentuhotep II, the restorer. At the heart of Egypt's rebirth stood one man, Nebhepetre Mentuhotep II, the king of Thebes who reunited the two lands around 2055 BCE. He came to power when Egypt was still fractured, the south weary but proud, the north fragile and uncertain. For years he fought campaigns up the river, slowly bringing province after province back under one rule. His victories were patient, measured, less the fury of conquest than the steady reweaving of a torn fabric. When his armies finally reached Heracleopolis, he did not raze it to the ground. He absorbed it, reuniting Egypt under the banner of Ma'at. His titles declared him Lord of the Two Lands, but also He who gives life to the heart of men. At Deir el-Bahari, across the river from Thebes, he built his mortuary temple, an elegant fusion of architecture and landscape. Terraces of limestone rose from the desert floor like the steps of a mountain, merging with the cliffs behind. There, among the winds and the shifting light, he was laid to rest, the king who healed a broken land. A kingdom of balance. The Middle Kingdom, 2055 to 1650 BCE, was an age of equilibrium. Its rulers sought not expansion or extravagance, but order. They rebuilt the bureaucracy, reorganized the provinces, restored the temples, and revived the old rituals. The idea of Ma'at, balance, truth, justice, became not just divine philosophy, but civic policy. Pharaohs of the 12th dynasty, especially Amenemhat and his son Senusret established a new capital called Ichtawi near modern Fayum, a city at the heart of the country, close to both Upper and Lower Egypt. From there, they could oversee the land like the sun in its daily path. Officials were carefully chosen, records meticulously kept, and irrigation projects extended the fertile zone of the Nile. Egypt once again became the world's most ordered civilization, not through monuments of size, but through the architecture of administration. The pharaoh as shepherd. The Middle Kingdom redefined kingship. Gone was the aloof god-king of the Old Kingdom. The new pharaoh was still divine, but also approachable, a shepherd of his people. Royal inscriptions speak not of cosmic grandeur, but of care, humility, and duty. In one of Amenemhat I's most famous texts, the Instruction of Amenemhat, written as advice from a murdered king to his son, he warns, "Trust not a brother, know not a friend. When you sleep, guard your own heart, for no man has followers on the day of sorrow." It is the voice of a human king, weary, wise, and aware of mortality. The idea of wisdom as legacy, of kings teaching sons through text, became a new kind of immortality. Where the Old Kingdom built pyramids of stone, the Middle Kingdom built pyramids of words. The Age of Scribes. This was also the golden age of Egyptian literature. Scribes, the guardians of knowledge, flourished under royal patronage. They wrote hymns, teachings, and tales that explored not only faith but emotion, courage, fear, love, loyalty, doubt. Among them, the tale of Sinuhe stands supreme. It tells of a court official who flees Egypt after hearing of the king's death, wandering into foreign lands, torn by guilt and longing for home. In exile, he grows old, until one day a royal messenger comes. The new king forgives him and calls him back. Sinuhe returns to Egypt, falls to the ground before his pharaoh, and weeps. The king embraces him and grants him a tomb, so that I may sleep in the land that gave me life. The story is both personal and universal, about identity, forgiveness, and the pull of home. In its quiet humanity, we hear the voice of a civilization that has learned compassion from suffering. Art and architecture, serenity in stone. The art of the Middle Kingdom reflects the same balance, refined, introspective, graceful. Sculptures of pharaohs from this era, such as those of Senusret III, show faces lined with care and thought, not the youthful perfection of earlier ages. His eyes are heavy, his mouth firm, his expression weary but determined. The artists no longer idealized their kings, they humanized them. Tombs of nobles and officials, particularly in Beni Hassan, display detailed scenes of daily life, wrestling matches, weaving, hunting in the desert. The colors are soft, the gestures natural. It is art not of propaganda, but of observation. Egypt as it was lived. Even architecture softened. Instead of towering monuments, temples became integrated with their surroundings. The desert, the cliffs, the river, all blended into one harmonious vision. In Deir el-Bahari, a century after Mentuhotep II, Queen Hatshepsut would later build her own temple on the same site, echoing his terraces, proof that his vision endured. The reach of Egypt. The Middle Kingdom did not isolate itself. Its pharaohs re-established trade and exploration, expanding Egypt's reach across land and sea. Caravans crossed the eastern desert to the Red Sea, sailing south to Punt, the land of the gods, bringing back incense, ebony, gold, and exotic animals. Expeditions journeyed north to Byblos for cedar and south into Nubia, where forts guarded Egypt's borders and secured access to gold mines. Yet even these conquests were tempered by order. Inscriptions at Semna, near the southern frontier, record Senusret III's warning, "No Nubian shall cross this boundary except for trade or by permission, for it is the king who commands the waters and the lands." Egypt had learned the limits of ambition. The empire was a garden to be tended, not a prize to be seized. Faith and the afterlife. Religious thought also deepened during this era. In the Old Kingdom, eternal life had been the privilege of kings. Now, that promise extended to all. Ordinary Egyptians began to inscribe prayers and coffin texts inside their wooden sarcophagi, spells to guide the soul through the underworld. One reads, "I am yesterday, I know tomorrow. I am the mysterious one who created himself. I am the water that brings life." The afterlife was no longer distant and royal, but intimate and accessible, a shared journey. The god Osiris, once a minor deity of vegetation, rose to prominence as the ruler of the dead. His myth, of death, dismemberment, and resurrection, resonated deeply with a people who had lived through chaos and found renewal. To live like Osiris was to die and rise again, a promise woven into the Egyptian soul. The People's Egypt archaeology paints a vivid picture of daily life in the Middle Kingdom. Villages like Kahun, near the pyramid of Senusret II, have yielded papyri, tools, toys, and everyday records. We find lists of workers, letters of love and complaint, and even medical texts describing treatments for wounds and childbirth. There were schools for scribes, markets filled with pottery and grain, and festivals honoring local gods. Life was organized but vibrant, disciplined but full of song. In a letter from one worker to another, a man complains that his colleague borrowed my cloak and has not returned it. Another text records a woman's will, leaving property to her children, a sign that women held legal rights and could own land. It is a world both ancient and familiar, practical, affectionate, sometimes weary, always enduring. Amenemhat III, the steward of prosperity. Among the later kings of the 12th dynasty, Amenemhat III stands as a figure of quiet greatness. His long reign brought Egypt to its height of peace and wealth. He expanded irrigation projects in the Fayum oasis, transforming desert into farmland. There he built a great complex, the Labyrinth of Hawara, described by Greek travelers centuries later as one of the wonders of the world, filled with hundreds of chambers and courtyards. Under his rule, Egypt's borders were secure, its trade flourishing, its people content. He embodied the Middle Kingdom ideal, not the conqueror, but the caretaker. When he died, he was buried not in a towering pyramid, but in a practical one. Smaller, understated, but precisely engineered. The grandeur of the Old Kingdom had given way to the grace of maturity, the shadow of decline. Yet even harmony has its fragility. Toward the end of the 12th dynasty, the floods again grew erratic. Resources thinned, bureaucracy bloated, and succession disputes weakened the throne. The 13th dynasty saw a rapid succession of kings, names half lost, reigns short and uncertain. Local governors grew stronger, foreign settlers entered the delta, and the old pattern began again. Central authority fading, provinces rising. This time, however, the threat would come not from within, but from beyond. From across the Sinai, new peoples moved into Egypt, traders, then settlers, then rulers. They would later be known as the Hyksos, the rulers of foreign lands. But before that storm, Egypt had achieved something rare in human history, a civilization of wisdom. The Middle Kingdom did not seek eternity in monument or conquest. It found it in understanding, the knowledge that balance, not power, sustains the world. Legacy of light. To later Egyptians, the Middle Kingdom was the age of rebirth, the model of good governance, justice, and artistry. Scribes of later dynasties copied its texts as moral guides. Its kings were remembered not as gods, but as wise men who had walked with humility. And perhaps that is Egypt's deepest truth, that greatness lies not in stone, but in the harmony between human frailty and divine order. When the sun set on the Middle Kingdom, it did so gently, not in fire, but in the golden calm of fulfillment. The river continued to flow, the songs of the scribes continued to echo, and though new storms gathered beyond the horizon, Egypt had already proven that it could die and rise again. For in the rhythm of the Nile, of flood, fall, and renewal, Egypt had found the secret of eternity. Every civilization, no matter how eternal it seems, must one day face the stranger at its gates. For Egypt, that stranger came not with cataclysm, but with quiet persistence. Merchants, herders, travelers crossing the northeastern frontier, bringing with them new languages, new gods, and new ways of war. They would become known as the Hyksos, and though their reign was brief in the vast sweep of Egypt's history, their impact would echo for centuries. The coming of strangers. The word Hyksos comes from the Egyptian phrase Heka Kasut, rulers of foreign lands. They were not a single people, but a mix. Semitic-speaking settlers from Canaan and Syria, drawn to Egypt by its fertile delta and by the wealth of trade. For generations, they lived peacefully among Egyptians in the north. They herded animals, traded copper and timber, and introduced new crops and crafts. But as the central power of the Middle Kingdom faded, these outsiders gained influence. Around 1650 BCE, one of their chieftains established control over the city of Avaris in the eastern delta. From there, they expanded, gradually taking control of Lower Egypt. The old order, already weakened by internal strife, yielded almost without a fight. To Egyptians of the south, the shock was immense. For the first time in 1,000 years, the throne of the two lands was held by foreigners. Avaris, the foreign capital. Avaris, the Hyksos capital, was unlike any Egyptian city before it. Situated near the marshy branches of the Nile, it was a crossroads of cultures: Egyptian, Levantine, Mesopotamian. Excavations reveal temples to both Egyptian and Canaanite gods, and houses built in foreign styles. Its walls enclosed workshops, warehouses, and docks crowded with ships. Trade flourished. Tin, silver, olive oil, and wine flowed from the Mediterranean, gold and grain from the south. The Hyksos adopted much of Egypt's administrative system: its scribes, its symbols, even its language, but infused it with their own customs. Their kings bore Egyptian-style titles and names, but also honored foreign deities, especially Seth, the storm god of chaos, whom they equated with their own Baal. To many Egyptians, this syncretism was unsettling, an erosion of the sacred balance between order and divine rule. But beneath the tension, something remarkable was happening. Cultures were blending, technology was advancing, and Egypt was learning from its conquerors. The technology of transformation. For all the resentment that the Hyksos would later inspire, Egypt owed them several crucial innovations. They introduced the horse and chariot, a new kind of weapon that would revolutionize Egyptian warfare. They brought the composite bow, made of wood, horn, and sinew, smaller, stronger, deadlier. They improved bronze casting, spinning techniques, and perhaps even new methods of fortification. To a civilization that had long relied on riverboats and infantry, these were revelations. Egypt's future military power, the chariots of Thutmose and Ramses, the empire of the New Kingdom, was born from these foreign seeds. Sometimes transformation comes not through triumph, but through humility. Life under the Hyksos. The Hyksos ruled the north. The south remained under Egyptian princes based in Thebes. Between them lay a fragile frontier near Middle Egypt, sometimes peaceful, sometimes aflame. Daily life under Hyksos rule was not marked by brutality. Farmers still sowed and harvested, craftsmen still worked in their shops, priests still chanted in temples. The newcomers adopted much of Egyptian culture, even building pyramids and using hieroglyphs. But to the proud Thebans, this coexistence was intolerable. The idea of a foreigner wearing the double crown was an affront to the very principle of Ma'at. Egypt could not be whole while ruled by outsiders. The seeds of resistance. In Thebes, a line of local rulers began to gather strength, men who called themselves heirs of Horus and claimed descent from the kings of the Middle Kingdom. One of them, Sekenenre-Tao, took the first bold step. Inscriptions tell us little, but his mummy tells us more. His skull bears deep battle wounds, a crushed temple, a cleaved cheek, a gash from an axe. He likely died fighting the Hyksos. His courage lit a flame that would not go out. His wife, Queen Ahotep, became a symbol of defiance. She rallied the Theban army, awarded medals of gold to loyal soldiers, and raised their young son, Ahmose, to continue the fight. In quiet Thebes, under the shadow of the cliffs, an entire generation prepared to reclaim their homeland. The War of Liberation. Around 1550 BCE, Ahmose, now a young king, launched a campaign against the Hyksos. The struggle lasted years, a series of sieges and naval battles along the Nile. Ancient records tell of the courage of soldiers like Ahmose, son of Abana, a warrior from Elkab, whose tomb inscriptions preserve his deeds. He writes, "I fought hand to hand. I brought back a prisoner. I was given gold for my valor." His words, carved in neat hieroglyphs, echo across 3.5 millennia, the voice of an ordinary man who helped forge a nation. The Thebans used the Hyksos' own weapons against them, horses, chariots, and bows. Slowly they pushed northward, capturing strongholds one by one, until finally they besieged Avaris itself. When the city fell, the Hyksos fled into Canaan, pursued by Ahmose's army. Egypt was free again. Ahmose, the founder of a new age. Ahmose emerged not just as a conqueror, but as a unifier. He restored the temples, reopened the quarries, and re-established the traditions of the ancestors. He sent expeditions to Nubia and Punt, rebuilt Memphis and Thebes, and reorganized the state. In his inscriptions, he declares, "I made Egypt whole again. I destroyed the foreigners. I raised what was fallen. I restored what had been broken." To his people, he was more than a king. He was renewal incarnate. the dawn after a long night. The expulsion of the Hyksos marked not merely the end of occupation, but the beginning of a new identity. Egypt had been humbled, tested, and transformed. From that crucible would arise its most powerful and radiant era, the New Kingdom, the legacy of the Hyksos. History is rarely kind to the vanquished. Later Egyptian texts portrayed the Hyksos as barbaric invaders, vile Asiatics who defiled the land. Yet the truth is more complex. They were conquerors, yes, but also contributors. Their reign forced Egypt to evolve, politically, militarily, technologically. They opened Egypt to the wider world, connecting it with the Levant, Mesopotamia, and beyond. Without the Hyksos, the Egypt of Thutmose, Hatshepsut, and Ramses, the empire that would one day stretch from Syria to Nubia might never have existed. Sometimes, a civilization must be broken open to find its strength. The turning of the tide. As Ahmose's banners rose over Thebes and the hymns of victory echoed along the river, the land felt reborn. Temples reopened, scribes recorded triumphs, and farmers once again offered grain to the gods. The scars of occupation remained, but they were transfigured into wisdom. Egypt had learned resilience, the art of recovery. In the golden light of dawn, the Nile gleamed as it always had, silent, eternal, forgiving. The foreign kings were gone, but their lessons remained embedded in the land itself. The priests proclaimed that Ma'at had been restored. The people believed them. And for a time, it was true. From the ashes of foreign rule rose a new Egypt, proud, powerful, and unafraid to look beyond its borders. Ahead lay its most glorious age, the New Kingdom, the Empire of the Sun. If you've journeyed this far, you already feel the pulse of history beneath the sand. Let this story flow with you. Leave a like to keep the river moving, and share it so others may walk these same forgotten paths. Together, we keep the past alive, one quiet story at a time. The river flows as it always has, but its reflection has changed. Once, Egypt looked inward, to stone, to order, to memory. Now it looks outward, to conquest, wealth, and the glittering edges of the world. This is the New Kingdom, the age of empire, glory, and divine kingship reborn. From 1550 to 1070 BCE, Egypt stood at the height of its power. The temples of Karnak and Luxor gleamed in the sun, chariots thundered across foreign plains, and the pharaohs ruled from the fourth cataract of the Nile to the mountains of Syria. But beneath all the splendor, Egypt's heart still beat to the same rhythm: the river, the sun, the balance of Ma'at. Ahmose and the dawn of the 18th dynasty. The New Kingdom began with Ahmose I, the Theban king who drove out the Hyksos. His victory was more than liberation. It was transformation. He rebuilt temples, reopened mines, and filled the granaries. He rewarded his soldiers with land, creating a new class of loyal nobles bound not by birth, but by merit. For the first time, commoners who served the crown bravely could rise to honor, a quiet revolution written in limestone and gold. Ahmose's reign restored faith in divine kingship. The gods, it seemed, had returned to Egypt. Upon his death, his descendants, the kings and queens of the 18th dynasty, would turn that faith into an empire. Amenhotep I and the flowering of Thebes. Ahmose's son, Amenhotep I, continued his father's vision. Under him, Thebes became not just a capital, but a sacred city. He built temples for Amun, the hidden one, god of the air and the unseen, who would soon rise to become the supreme deity of Egypt. Thebes, with its twin sanctuaries of Karnak and Luxor, became the beating spiritual heart of the kingdom. When Amenhotep died, he was worshipped as a god himself, protector of the necropolis, guardian of artisans and builders. The men who later carved the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings prayed to him for strength and safety. In this age, Even death became a partnership between man and divinity, each generation carving eternity for the next. Thutmose I, the empire awakens. Under Thutmose I, Egypt stepped beyond its borders. He led his armies deep into Nubia, where fortresses and quarries had long supplied Egypt's gold. There he built monuments to mark his victories, his name carved on stone at the southern edge of the known world. But Thutmose did not stop there. His soldiers crossed the Sinai and marched into Canaan and Syria, reaching as far as the Euphrates River. For the first time, the Egyptian flag, the banners of Horus and Ra, flew on foreign soil. These campaigns were not merely military, they were symbolic. They affirmed Egypt's belief that the sun's light, and by extension its divine order, should illuminate all lands. Thutmose built the first royal tomb in the Valley of the Kings, hidden among cliffs west of Thebes. The pyramids had drawn thieves and desecration. Now the kings would rest in secrecy, their tombs carved into the living rock, chambers filled with texts, paintings, and offerings to guide the soul through the underworld. The valley would become the resting place of Egypt's mightiest rulers, silent, solemn, eternal. Hatshepsut, the woman who became Pharaoh. When Thutmose I died, his lineage continued through his daughter Hatshepsut, one of the most extraordinary figures in all of Egyptian history. At first, she served as regent for her young stepson, Thutmose III, but in time, she took full power, declaring herself Pharaoh of the Two Lands. She donned the royal beard, the double crown, and took the throne name Matkare. Truth is the soul of Ra. Her reign, rather than one of conquest, was one of peace, trade, and magnificent construction. At Deir el-Bahari, opposite Thebes, she built her mortuary temple, a vision of terraces, colonnades, and ramps merging seamlessly into the cliffs. Even now it stands among the most serene creations of the ancient world, a hymn to order and beauty. In her inscriptions she speaks not of war, but of harmony. I have given peace to the two lands. I have made all men live in love. Her most famous expedition was to Punt, the land of the gods, likely modern Somalia or Eritrea. Egyptian ships sailed down the Red Sea, bringing back incense trees, gold, ivory, and exotic animals. Reliefs on her temple walls show the voyage in exquisite detail. Sailors rowing, traders greeting, the Queen of Punt welcoming her guests. Hatshepsut's reign was a golden pause, a breath between wars, when Egypt looked not outward for conquest, but inward for beauty. When she died, her stepson Thutmose III inherited a strong, rich kingdom, and with it the means to expand it beyond imagination. Thutmose III, the warrior king. If Hatshepsut was Egypt's builder queen, Thutmose III was its conqueror. Called the Napoleon of Egypt, he reigned for more than 50 years, leading at least 17 campaigns into the Levant. His first great victory came at Megiddo, where he outmaneuvered a coalition of Canaanite princes. His strategy, a daring march through a narrow mountain pass, caught the enemy by surprise and cemented his legend. The victory was recorded in detail on the walls of Karnak, the earliest known military chronicle in history. It lists the spoils of war, chariots, horses, captives, and exotic tribute, cedar, silver, lapis, and spices. Thutmose III did not merely raid, he organized. He installed Egyptian governors, demanded hostages from foreign princes, and brought the wealth of Asia back to Thebes. Egypt became an empire of both land and idea, its culture radiating outward like sunlight. Under him, Karnak reached new heights. Rows of sphinxes, towering obelisks, and pillared halls turned the temple into a living map of the cosmos. The gods had never been closer to the world of men. Art and spirit of empire. In the New Kingdom, Egypt's art reached sublime refinement. Painters captured movement with grace. Sculptors carved faces of quiet strength and inner life. Even the afterlife changed. The Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and illustrations, guided every soul, not only kings, through the trials of the underworld. It spoke of judgment before Osiris, where the heart was weighed against a feather, symbol of Ma'at. To live justly was to pass lightly into eternity. The Egyptians no longer built pyramids, but their tombs became vast painted worlds. In the Valley of the Kings, walls shimmered with stars, rivers, and gods, maps for the soul's journey through night. At the same time, ordinary life flourished. The workers' village of Deir el-Medina, home to the artisans who carved royal tombs, offers glimpses of family life. Letters between husbands and wives, prayers scratched on ostraca, love poems written for quiet evenings. One reads, "My beloved is like the lotus that opens at dawn, her voice sweeter than the harp, her gaze brighter than the sun." In these verses, empire and humanity coexist. The grandeur of kings, the tenderness of hearts. Amun-Ra, the king of the gods. As Egypt's empire expanded, so too did its religion. The local god Amun, patron of Thebes, merged with Ra, the sun god, becoming Amun-Ra, supreme lord of heaven and earth. His temple at Karnak grew into one of the largest religious complexes ever built, a city of columns, sanctuaries, and sacred lakes. Pharaohs offered gold and incense, dedicating obelisks and festivals to his name. In the annual Opet festival, statues of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu were carried from Karnak to Luxor in golden boats, accompanied by music and song. It was a celebration of renewal, the divine and royal merging in joy. Through Amun-Ra, Egypt saw itself reflected, hidden yet radiant, enduring yet ever reborn. The empire at its height. By the mid-15th century BCE, Egypt was the wealthiest power in the known world. Gold from Nubia, cedar from Lebanon, lapis from Afghanistan, all flowed into its temples. Tribute from conquered lands filled its treasuries. Foreign princes sent their daughters to marry Egyptian kings. Messengers arrived bearing gifts of ivory and incense. The name of Pharaoh commanded respect from the Nile to the Euphrates. But beneath the triumph lay the seeds of tension. Wealth breeds pride. Power breeds ambition. And in the generations to come, the light that had risen so high would begin to shift, to waver, to seek new gods and new truths. The end of an age of conquest. When Thutmose III died, Egypt stood secure, unmatched in strength and prestige. Yet the empire he built would soon face a different kind of revolution. Not of armies, but of faith. His grandson, Amenhotep III, would preside over an age of luxury and art, the soft brilliance before sunset. And his son, Amenhotep IV, would break the world open again, turning his face toward a single god, the Aten, and reshaping Egypt's soul. But that is another story, the dawn of the heretic king and the dream of a new sun. For now, the empire stands at its zenith, the pyramids silent in the west, the temples blazing in the east, and the Nile flowing through it all, eternal as time, patient as truth. Every civilization that reaches its zenith must, in time, look inward. And when it does, it finds not certainty, but reflection, the gaze of the gods staring back. For Egypt, that moment came in the 14th century BCE, under a king who dreamed of light. Amenhotep III, twilight splendor. Before the upheaval came beauty and peace. Amenhotep III, grandson of Thutmose III, inherited an empire that stretched farther and shone brighter than any before it. Yet unlike his warrior ancestors, he ruled not with the sword, but with serenity. He built palaces of breathtaking grace. Malkata, near Thebes, with painted walls of birds, flowers, and open skies. He expanded Luxor Temple, where columns rose like papyrus stems in a forest of stone. His reign was a golden age of diplomacy and abundance. Foreign kings called him brother and sent gifts of gold, lapis, and horses. In his time, Egypt was not conquering the world. The world came to Egypt. The arts reached their pinnacle. Sculpture became natural, tender, alive. Relief showed the king not as an aloof god, but as a man, calm, smiling, surrounded by his family. Amenhotep married Queen Tiye, a woman of remarkable intelligence and strength. Her statues show a face of quiet confidence, eyes steady, lips firm, a partner, not an ornament. Together they presided over an empire at ease with itself. But in that ease lay the beginning of questioning. For when men live without fear, they begin to ask what the gods truly want. Akhenaten, the heretic king. Their son, Amenhotep IV, came to the throne around 1353 BCE. He would soon abandon his birth name and his father's gods, calling himself instead Akhenaten, he who serves the Aten. The Aten was not a god like others. It was the visible sun itself, not as a being, but as a force, a disk whose rays ended in open hands, giving life to all. Akhenaten proclaimed that this single god alone was real. He closed the temples of Amun and the old deities. He moved the capital from Thebes to a new city he called Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten, known today as Amarna. There in the desert, he built a world remade in light, temples without roofs, open to the sky, palaces with painted gardens, ponds filled with lotus and fish, reliefs showing not stern rituals, but scenes of daily life, the royal family eating, laughing, playing with children beneath the outstretched hands of the Aten. It was a revolution, artistic, religious, and philosophical. For the first time, the divine was not hidden in shadow or stone. It was in the open air, in sunlight, in love itself. The revolution of art. The art of the Amarna period is unlike anything before or after. Where once the pharaoh was idealized, broad-shouldered, eternal, now he appears slender, elongated, almost fragile. His belly swells, his face softens, his skull elongates. Some see disease, others symbolism, the merging of male and female, human and divine. Akhenaten's queen, Nefertiti, appears beside him as equal, tall, graceful, her beauty immortalized in the limestone bust now in Berlin. Together, they were the living embodiment of creation, king and queen, sun and earth, giver and receiver of light. Their daughters appear in art with affectionate realism, clinging to their parents, laughing, touching their faces. For the first time, royal life feels human, almost intimate. It was as if, for a brief moment, Egypt exhaled, dropping its mask of eternity to reveal tenderness. But revolutions, especially those of faith, do not last long under the desert sun. The cost of the dream. Akhenaten's vision alienated many. The priests of Amun, powerful, wealthy, ancient, saw their temples shuttered and their incomes vanish. The people, long accustomed to a pantheon of gods who governed every aspect of life, found the new worship abstract, distant. While the king and his family basked in sunlight, Egypt's empire began to wane. Vassal states in Syria and Canaan sent desperate letters, the Amarna letters, still preserved on clay tablets, pleading for Egyptian aid against invaders. "Why do you not send the archers, my lord? All the lands are lost." But the pharaoh did not respond. He was consumed by his vision, gazing at the sun while the borders burned. Even within his new city, cracks appeared. After years of devotion, his beloved Nefertiti vanished from the record. Whether through death or exile, we cannot know. Soon after, Akhenaten himself died, leaving behind confusion, resentment, and a fractured faith. His successor, a young boy, perhaps his son, would inherit not a kingdom of light, but a land in need of healing. Tutankhamun, the boy who restored the gods. The boy's name was Tutankhaten, living image of the Aten. But under the guidance of priests and generals, he changed it to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. The old gods returned, the temples reopened, the sun disk of the Aten dimmed, absorbed once more into the vast, comforting pantheon. Tutankhamun ruled only briefly, dying around age 19. His reign was small in deeds but immense in symbol. Egypt had rediscovered balance after the storm. And though his name might have faded like so many others, fate had other plans. In 1922, his tomb, hidden deep in the Valley of the Kings, was found almost intact by Howard Carter. Inside lay treasures beyond imagining: golden shrines, chariots, jewelry, and the iconic mask of beaten gold and lapis, serene and youthful. In that face, the world saw not just a boy king, but the eternal mystery of Egypt itself: beauty, impermanence, and the illusion of death conquered by art. Horemheb and the return to order. After Tutankhamun's death, the throne passed to the general Horemheb, a soldier of discipline and reform. He erased the heretic kings' names from monuments, restored the temples, and rewrote the list of kings to skip over the Amarna years entirely. To later generations, Akhenaten would be a ghost, remembered only as the enemy of Akhetaten. Yet the changes he inspired could not be undone. Egyptian art retained a touch of his realism, Egyptian religion a trace of his intimacy. Even denial cannot erase revelation. The 19th dynasty, Egypt triumphant. With Horemheb's death, power passed to his vizier, Ramses V, founder of the 19th dynasty. His son, Seti I, and grandson, Ramses II, would carry Egypt into its most dramatic age. Seti I restored the empire's prestige, leading successful campaigns into Syria and building grand temples, especially at Abydos, his masterpiece, where rows of pillars and carved reliefs glow with exquisite detail. There, on walls softened by time, the story of creation and the lineage of kings unfold like scripture in stone. But it was his son, Ramses II, who would become legend. Ramses the Great. Ramses II reigned for more than 60 years, a lifetime of splendor and ambition. He built on a scale unseen since the Old Kingdom. His temples, Abu Simbel, carved into cliffs overlooking the Nile, remain among the most awe-inspiring monuments ever made. 4 colossal statues of the king sit in eternal watch, bathed in sunrise twice each year, their faces serene, godlike. Ramses was a warrior, priest, and master of image. He fought the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites, one of the earliest battles in recorded history. Though the outcome was uncertain, his inscriptions declared it a triumph. His chariot charges across temple walls in a blur of motion, arrows flying, horses straining, an immortal moment frozen in stone. Years later, he signed with the Hittites what is considered the world's first peace treaty, ensuring stability through diplomacy rather than war. He married queens and fathered more than 100 children. His favorite, Nefertari, was honored with her own temple beside his at Abu Simbel, delicate, majestic, equal in grace. The love poem he dedicated to her still survives. My love is unique. No one can rival her. Fairer than all women, she is like the rising star at dawn. Ramses ruled longer than most men lived. He watched his sons grow old, his empire waver, and his monuments outlast his flesh. When he died, Egypt mourned not just a king, but an age. The shadow after glory. The later years of the new kingdom saw Egypt grow weary. Its wealth was immense, but its heart was stretched thin. Foreign wars drained its strength. Priestly power swelled once more. Tombs were plundered. Drought and corruption spread like desert wind. And yet, the art, the words, the faith endured. Even in decline, Egypt's light remained golden. The kings of this time may fade, but the memory of their world, its balance of grandeur and humanity, never will. The new kingdom had begun with the dream of one God and ended with the monuments of many. It rose in light and faded in shadow, but through it all the Nile continued to flow, carrying Egypt's reflection into eternity. Every civilization, no matter how brilliant, eventually learns to live with loss. By the close of the new kingdom, Egypt, once the conqueror of nations, stood surrounded by its own memories. The pyramids still gleamed under the sun, the temples still echoed with chants, and the river still rose and fell in its patient rhythm. But the empire's strength had thinned. The hands that once held the world now trembled beneath the weight of time. This was Egypt's late period, a story not of conquest, but of endurance. The waning of empire. After the death of Ramses II, the 20th dynasty struggled to hold the empire together. His successors bore his name, but not his power. Foreign threats pressed in from every side. The Libyans to the west, the Sea Peoples from the Mediterranean, and the Nubians to the south. Egypt's armies, weary from decades of war, faltered. Its treasury, drained by monument building and bureaucracy, ran dry. In the reign of Ramses III, the last great pharaoh of the new kingdom, Egypt fought valiantly to repel invaders. Reliefs at his mortuary temple in Medinet Habu depict the chaos. Ships locked in battle, arrows flying, the pharaoh standing amid the storm like a rock in the tide. He won, barely, and for a moment, Egypt seemed safe. But the victory was fleeting. After his death, internal strife returned. Priests of Amun in Thebes grew powerful, rivaling the kings themselves. Tomb robberies spread even into the Valley of the Kings, where the dead were stripped of gold and memory alike. The great house of Pharaoh had become a house divided. The Third Intermediate Period. Egypt. Divided by 1070 BCE, the unity that had defined Egypt for 2,000 years dissolved. In the north, at Tanis, kings ruled with fragile authority. In the south, high priests of Amun governed from Thebes, wielding spiritual power that often outweighed royal command. For centuries, Egypt had believed that the king alone could uphold Ma'at, the balance of the cosmos. Now that belief fractured. The two lands were divided not by geography, but by faith. Yet even amid division, life went on. Temples still rose, art still flourished, hymns were still sung. Egypt, it seemed, did not die. It adapted. Foreign mercenaries joined the army. Libyans, Nubians, even Greeks. The Nile remained the thread binding it all, steady as the stars above. The Libyan Pharaohs. In time, some of these foreign soldiers became rulers themselves. Libyan chieftains, once hired as guards and generals, established dynasties in the delta. The most notable was Sheshonq-Waz, who founded the 22nd dynasty and sought to restore Egypt's pride. He marched into Palestine, sacked Jerusalem, and recorded his triumph on the walls of Karnak, a faint echo of the glory of Thutmose and Ramses. But his empire was short-lived. Local rulers continued to rise and fall like the tides, their names fading into the dust. Egypt was no longer the master of the world, but a mosaic of memories, fragments of greatness scattered across the river's long course. The Nubian kings. Egypt reclaimed from the south, and then, from the south, came a new dawn, unexpected, and in its own way, reverent. In the land of Kush, what is now Sudan, the people of Nubia had long admired and adopted Egyptian culture. They built temples to Amun, wrote in hieroglyphs, and buried their kings beneath pyramids smaller, but no less symbolic. Around 750 BCE, a Kushite ruler named Pi marched north. In his own inscriptions, he claims he came not to conquer, but to restore Ma'at, the order that Egypt itself had forgotten. The god Amun made me king of the two lands. I am his son, born of his heart, sent to restore what is right. Pia's campaign united Egypt under the 25th dynasty, the so-called Kushite dynasty. His successors, including Shabaka and Taharqa, ruled with devotion and dignity. They repaired temples, revived ancient rituals, and honored the old gods with sincerity, rare even among Egyptian-born kings. Their art blended Egyptian form with Nubian vigor, muscular figures, calm faces, eyes turned toward eternity. Under them, Egypt felt for a moment reborn, not as conqueror, but as believer, the Assyrian storm. But to the east, a new power was rising, fierce, disciplined, relentless. The Assyrians, masters of siege and empire, had already conquered Mesopotamia and Syria. To them, Egypt was both prize and rival. Around 671 BCE, their king Esarhaddon invaded. His armies swept down the Nile like a desert wind. Memphis fell. The Kushite king Taharqa retreated to Nubia, watching as the Assyrians plundered the land. Egypt was occupied, not by settlers or traders this time, but by an army of iron. The Assyrians ruled briefly, installing puppet kings in the delta. Yet their empire, vast and stretched thin, could not hold Egypt's heart. As soon as they withdrew, rebellion flared. Egypt was wounded, but unbroken. The Saite Renaissance. Egypt's last reawakening. From the ashes rose one last native dynasty, the 26th, based in Sis, a city in the western delta. Its founder, Psamtik-Purs, reunited Egypt once more around 664 BCE. He opened the ports to Greek traders and mercenaries, blending old and new worlds. The Nile again became a bridge between Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean. Under Psamtik and his successors, Egypt experienced a final flowering. Art refined, temples rebuilt, learning revived. Scribes recopied ancient texts. Sculptors returned to old kingdom styles, serene, symmetrical, timeless. Kings like Necho II launched ambitious projects, canals linking the Nile to the Red Sea, explorations of Africa's coasts. This period, often called the Saite Renaissance, was Egypt's last moment of confident grace, a civilization looking backward, preserving itself through memory. But time, as always, was patient. Beyond the horizon, a new empire was stirring. The Persian conquest. In 525 BCE, Egypt faced the Persians, masters of an empire that stretched from India to the Aegean. Their king, Cambyses II, defeated Egypt's last pharaoh, Psamtik III, at the Battle of Pelusium. According to legend, he used cats, sacred to the Egyptians, as shields, knowing they would not dare harm the animals of Bastet. Whether true or not, the story reflects the bitterness of Egypt's final fall. Cambyses crowned himself pharaoh, adopting Egyptian customs and titles, but the age of native kings was over. Egypt had become a province in a world it once ruled. Yet even under Persian control, Egyptian culture endured. Temples continued to function, scribes copied hymns, farmers still offered thanks to the Nile. Conquest could take the crown, but not the soul. The Greeks arrive. The Persians would rule, lose, and return. But time was already shifting westward. In 332 BCE, Alexander the Great marched into Egypt. The Persians fled without a fight. To the Egyptians, Alexander seemed less a conqueror than a liberator, another divine son come to restore order. He journeyed to the oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis, where priests hailed him as the son of the god himself. There, under the desert stars, the line of pharaohs was reborn in foreign form. At the mouth of the Nile, Alexander founded a new city, Alexandria, destined to become one of the greatest centers of knowledge in the ancient world. But that is the story of another dynasty, another age, when Egypt would speak Greek, worship old gods with new names, and give the world its most famous queen. For now, the ancient kingdom rests, weary but unbroken. The meaning of endurance. The late period is often remembered as decline, the slow erosion of greatness. But to look closer is to see something far more profound. Through invasion, famine, and loss, Egypt never ceased to be Egypt. Its farmers still watched the floods. Its priests still recited the same prayers. Its artisans still carved with the same care. The gods may have changed names, but their essence, the balance of Maat, endured. Where others sought conquest, Egypt sought continuity. Even in defeat, it refused to forget itself. And so, as the sun dips low over the river, the land of the Pharaohs enters its long twilight, not extinguished, but transformed, waiting for the next dawn. The sands remember everything. They remember when the kings spoke in hieroglyphs, when priests called on Amun beneath the moon, and when stone whispered to stars. But in time, new voices began to echo along the Nile, voices speaking Greek, building in marble, and dreaming in the language of philosophy. This was Egypt reborn under the Ptolemies, the last dynasty of the Pharaohs, and the bridge between two worlds. Alexander's vision. In 332 BCE, Alexander the Great crossed the desert into Egypt. He found a weary land, long ruled by Persians, yearning for balance once more. The Egyptians, seeing him as a liberator, welcomed him with open arms. At Memphis, priests crowned him pharaoh. He offered sacrifices to the gods and made pilgrimage to the oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis, where the high priest greeted him as son of the sun. Whether it was prophecy or flattery, Alexander believed it. Before leaving Egypt, he founded a new city on the Mediterranean, Alexandria. Its design was precise, geometric, and visionary, streets crossing at right angles, harbors opening to east and west, temples and theaters mingled with markets. At its heart, a great library would one day rise, and with it, a dream that knowledge itself might be eternal. Alexander soon departed to conquer the East, and never returned. He died in Babylon in 323 BCE, and his empire fractured. His general Ptolemy, son of Lagus, claimed Egypt as his share. From soldier, he became pharaoh. Ptolemy I, the first Greek pharaoh, Ptolemy I Soter, the savior, was both pragmatic and patient. He understood that to rule Egypt, one must become Egyptian. He wore the double crown, offered to the gods of the Nile, and built temples in the old style. Yet he also embraced Greek thought and art, fusing the two into something new. At Alexandria, he established the library and the Mauseon, a temple of the Muses, where scholars from every land gathered. There, for the first time, the wisdom of East and West met beneath one roof. Philosophers, astronomers, physicians, and poets studied side by side, translating Babylonian star charts, Egyptian hymns, and Greek epics into a single, shared language of curiosity. It was here that Euclid refined geometry, Eratosthenes measured the Earth's circumference with astonishing accuracy, and Herophilus studied the human body, daring to dissect where others would not. The Library of Alexandria became more than a collection of scrolls. It was the memory of civilization itself, an attempt to gather all that humanity had learned into one eternal flame. A fusion of worlds. Under the Ptolemies, Egypt became a crossroads of culture. Greek settlers filled the new city, while the old capital of Memphis remained home to Egyptian tradition. The court spoke Greek, but the temples still echoed in Egyptian. In art, the two styles intertwined. Statues with Greek faces wearing Egyptian crowns, gods depicted with the precision of Athens and the mystery of Thebes. The Ptolemies ruled as both pharaohs and Hellenistic kings. They traced their lineage to both Zeus and Ra, to Dionysus and Osiris. The people may have murmured at the foreign tongue, but they understood the ritual. Egypt would always need a son of the sun. Ptolemy Twidi and the Lighthouse of Pharaohs. The dynasty's second ruler, Ptolemy II Philadelphus, turned Alexandria into the jewel of the Mediterranean. He expanded the library, built canals, and erected one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, the Lighthouse of Pharaohs. Rising over 100 meters high on an island at the mouth of the harbor, it guided sailors by day with its gleaming marble, and by night with fire reflected through polished bronze mirrors. To travelers approaching from the sea, its light was the first glimpse of Egypt, a promise that knowledge, like the flame, could conquer darkness. Under Ptolemy II, trade flourished from India to Greece. Ivory, spices, papyrus, and gold filled Alexandria's markets. The city's population soared past 500,000, making it the largest and most cosmopolitan metropolis of its time. Faith and philosophy. Religion, too, adapted. The Ptolemies needed a god who could unite Greek and Egyptian belief, a bridge between Zeus and Osiris. So they created Serapis, a deity of healing and abundance, depicted as a Greek man with Egyptian attributes. His temple, the Serapeum, became one of the grandest in Alexandria, drawing pilgrims from across the ancient world. Through Serapis, the Ptolemies spoke to both peoples at once. Through the library, they spoke to eternity. It was a delicate balance, power resting on tolerance, faith on fusion. But for a time, it worked. Wealth and shadows. As generations passed, the Ptolemies grew richer and more decadent. Dynastic marriages intertwined brothers and sisters to preserve divine blood. Court intrigues multiplied. Poets and philosophers mingled with spies and assassins. The later Ptolemies ruled less like philosophers and more like dramatists, each reign filled with alliances, betrayals, and tragic grandeur. Yet even in decline, the light of Alexandria did not dim. Its scholars continued their work, copying manuscripts, debating the stars, preserving what the rest of the world would later rediscover. But outside the city's marble walls, empires were shifting. To the west, a new power was rising, pragmatic, disciplined, and insatiable. Its name was Rome. Cleopatra's lineage. By the 1st century BCE, Egypt was a kingdom in name, but a pawn in larger games. The Ptolemies depended on Roman protection, and Rome in turn on Egypt's grain. In this fragile balance was born Cleopatra VII, the last of her line, brilliant, educated, fluent in 9 languages, and the only Ptolemaic ruler to speak Egyptian. She was not merely a queen, she was a scholar, a strategist, and a symbol. In her, the two worlds, Greek and Egyptian, met one last time in perfect harmony. Alexandria in its prime. During Cleopatra's youth, Alexandria remained the wonder of the ancient world. Its streets were filled with philosophers, mathematicians, and sailors from every nation. The library housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls, works of Homer, Plato, and lost Egyptian texts that no one would ever see again. The museum served as a university, an observatory, a sanctuary of learning. Scholars there mapped the heavens, studied anatomy, and wrote commentaries that would shape science for 2 millennia. The lighthouse still burned, visible for 50 miles across the sea, the eternal flame of knowledge. To walk through Alexandria then was to walk through the living mind of the world. The shadow of Rome. But even brilliance cannot shield from fate. In 48 BCE, civil war erupted in Rome between Julius Caesar and Pompey. Pompey fled to Egypt seeking refuge and was murdered on the orders of the Ptolemaic regent. When Caesar arrived, he was furious, but Cleopatra saw opportunity. Wrapped in a carpet, legend says, she had herself smuggled into Caesar's chamber. The tale may be myth, but the result was real. She captured his imagination and his allegiance. With Roman support, Cleopatra reclaimed her throne. For a brief, glittering moment, Egypt and Rome stood side by side. The wisdom of the East and the might of the West united under two lovers. But the world was changing. Caesar was assassinated in Rome, his empire divided. Cleopatra turned to another Roman, Mark Antony, and with him sought to rebuild the old dream of divine kingship. Together they ruled from Alexandria as living gods, Dionysus and Isis reborn. The fall of the Ptolemies. Their enemies in Rome saw danger in that dream. In 31 BCE, at the Battle of Actium, the forces of Antony and Cleopatra faced the fleet of Octavian, Caesar's heir. The sea turned to fire. The lovers fled to Egypt. The following year, Octavian's armies entered Alexandria. Antony fell on his sword. Cleopatra, cornered in her palace, chose her own death, the serpent's kiss upon her breast. With her, 3,000 years of pharaohs came to an end. Octavian, soon to be Augustus, the first Roman emperor, stood before her tomb and, according to legend, whispered that she was the last queen of the first nation. The legacy of Alexandria. Rome absorbed Egypt, but it could never possess her completely. The temples continued to function for centuries. Priests still spoke the old prayers. The library burned, perhaps by accident, perhaps by war. Its scrolls lost, but its vision immortal. In Alexandria's ruins, later generations would build again. Christian churches, Islamic libraries, modern cities, each rising from the bones of the old. But the dream that began there, the idea that all knowledge belongs to all humanity, would survive every conquest. Echoes of eternity. The Ptolemies may have been foreign, but they became Egyptian in the truest sense. They understood that immortality lies not in conquest, but in preservation. They did not build pyramids. They built libraries. They did not carve gods in stone. They carved ideas into memory. And though the wind long ago scattered the papyrus of Alexandria, the light that shone there still flickers. In every book, every question, every whisper of curiosity that moves the human heart. And so ends the story of the Greek pharaohs, of marble and papyrus, of passion and philosophy, of knowledge that dared to call itself eternal. Yet the Nile still flows, and with it Egypt still dreams. The desert wind still carries her name, Cleopatra, the last to wear the double crown, the last voice of Egypt's ancient soul. A queen, a scholar, a lover, a strategist. And above all, a woman who dared to live as if time itself could not outlast her will. Her life unfolded like a play written by history's own hand, luminous, intimate, and doomed. The birth of a queen, Cleopatra 7. Philopator was born around 69 BCE in the royal palace of Alexandria, a city of marble and light. She belonged to the Ptolemaic dynasty, descendants of Alexander's general Ptolemy, Greek by blood, but Egyptian by crown. From birth, she was surrounded by splendor and peril. Her family's politics were a labyrinth of alliances, betrayals, and assassinations. Siblings married, fought, and often killed each other for the throne. Yet even in this chaos, Cleopatra shone with rare brilliance. She studied philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. She read Homer and the Egyptian Book of the Dead alike. Unlike her forebears, she learned the Egyptian tongue, becoming the first of her dynasty to speak to her people in their own language. She mastered 9 languages in total, earning the admiration of Greek scholars and priests of the Nile alike. In her youth, she walked the halls of the great library, learning from its fading masters. There she absorbed the dream of Alexandria. That knowledge, not power, was the truest crown. But the world around her was changing. Rome, vast, hungry, restless, had already extended its hand toward Egypt. Soon, her destiny would entwine with that of the greatest empire the world had ever known. A throne. Divided. When Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy the XII, Auletes, died in 51 BCE, he left his throne to two children, Cleopatra, then about 18, and her younger brother Ptolemy the XIII, who was barely a boy. They were meant to rule together, husband and wife in name, as was Ptolemaic custom. But the court's factions, Greek nobles, Roman envoys, and ambitious generals, soon turned them against one another. Within 2 years, Cleopatra was forced into exile. She fled to Syria, gathering loyal troops, watching from afar as her brother's advisors took control of Alexandria. The city that had raised her now stood against her. It might have ended there, another forgotten queen swept aside by politics, had not the tide of Rome's civil war brought a certain general to Egypt's shores. The arrival of Julius Caesar. In 48 BCE, Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria, pursuing his rival Pompey, who had sought refuge there. But when Caesar landed, he found Pompey already dead, murdered by the very men who claimed loyalty to Cleopatra's brother. The act disgusted Caesar. He stayed in the city, claiming to arbitrate the royal dispute. Cleopatra saw her moment. According to legend, she had herself rolled in a carpet, or perhaps a linen sack, and smuggled into Caesar's chambers. When the cloth was unrolled, she emerged, radiant and unafraid, a living symbol of intelligence and charm. History may have embroidered the scene, but its meaning endures. Cleopatra understood that power, like beauty, was a performance, and she knew her stage. Caesar was captivated. In her, he saw not a supplicant, but an equal. Together they ruled Egypt, not merely as lovers, but as allies of ambition. The Queen of Renewal. With Caesar's support, Cleopatra regained her throne. Her brother drowned while fleeing battle, and she married another younger sibling, Ptolemy IV, though he remained a figurehead. In 47 BCE, she bore Caesar a son, Ptolemy XV, known to history as Caesarion, Little Caesar. It was a child both symbolic and dangerous. The blood of Rome and Egypt joined. For a time, Egypt flourished again. Cleopatra restored temples, stabilized the economy, and reasserted control over Nubia and Cyprus. She sailed the Nile with Caesar on a golden barge, its oars gilded, its sails of purple silk, a living pageant of divine rule. To her people, she was the goddess Isis reborn, mother, healer, queen. To Rome, she was mystery itself, the embodiment of a civilization both ancient and alive. But even love cannot hold back the tide of history. The Ides of March. In 44 BCE, Caesar was assassinated in Rome. His death sent shockwaves across the Mediterranean. Cleopatra, then in Rome with her young son, fled back to Egypt. She mourned, but also understood what his death meant. The balance of the world had shifted. Rome would never again be ruled by a single man, not openly. But soon, two men would rise from the ashes to claim Caesar's mantle, Mark Antony and Octavian. And in the choice between them, Cleopatra's fate would be sealed. Mark Antony, the second son. Mark Antony was unlike Caesar, less calculating, more impulsive, but charismatic, daring, and deeply human. When he summoned Cleopatra to answer for her loyalty to Caesar's memory, she sailed to meet him in Tarsus, upon a barge of gold. Ancient writers describe the scene: her sails of purple, her oars of silver, and her attendants dressed as nymphs and cupids. Perfume drifted across the harbor. Antony waited, and was conquered without a word. He invited her to dine. She invited him to a banquet of wonder. He found in her not only beauty, but intellect, confidence, and an equal hunger for greatness. They became lovers, partners, and co-rulers in all but name. The court of the living gods. In Alexandria, Antony and Cleopatra ruled as Dionysus and Isis reborn. Their court glittered with luxury, feasts of gold plate, pearls dissolved in wine, philosophers debating beside generals. But beneath the spectacle lay genuine governance. Cleopatra strengthened Egypt's economy, minted coins with both their faces, and secured the eastern Mediterranean through diplomacy and trade. Together they had 3 children: Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, names chosen not for vanity but for symbolism: sun, moon, and love. In them, the couple saw not indulgence, but the rebirth of empire, a dream of East and West united through lineage and faith. But in Rome, Octavian saw only threat: the war for the world. Octavian, cold, disciplined, and relentless, cast Antony and Cleopatra as enemies of Rome, seduced by Eastern decadence. Propaganda spread like wildfire. Cleopatra was called a witch, a temptress, a destroyer of men. Antony was painted as her puppet, a Roman undone by foreign spells. In 31 BCE, their forces met Octavian's fleet at Actium, off the coast of Greece. The battle was long and chaotic. When Cleopatra's flagship withdrew, Antony followed, abandoning the fight. Their fleet scattered. The dream collapsed. They fled to Egypt, knowing the end was near. The last days of Alexandria. In 30 BCE, Octavian's army marched into Egypt. Antony, despairing, fell on his sword. Bleeding, he was brought to Cleopatra's mausoleum, where she held him as he died. A Roman warrior cradled by an Egyptian queen, both undone by love and destiny. When Octavian entered her palace, Cleopatra refused to be paraded in chains. She prepared for death with ceremony and calm. On August 12, 30 BCE, she was found lifeless on a couch of gold, dressed in royal robes, her crown upon her brow. Beside her lay 2 maidservants and a small basket. Inside, perhaps, the asp whose bite ended her reign. The symbol of Isis, the cobra, had returned to its mistress. The death of a civilization. With Cleopatra's passing, Egypt ceased to be a kingdom. Octavian annexed it as a Roman province, the personal possession of the emperor. Her son Caesarion was executed. Her children by Antony were taken to Rome, raised in the house of Octavian's sister. The temples still stood, the Nile still flowed, but the line of the Pharaohs, unbroken for 3 millennia, was gone. Yet Cleopatra's story did not end with her death. It transformed into myth. To some, she was the destroyer of men. To others, the embodiment of wisdom, courage, and beauty. For poets, she was tragedy. For Egypt, she was memory. The legacy of the last pharaoh. Cleopatra's reign was the final breath of the world's first civilization. She was Greek by blood, Egyptian by heart, Roman by destiny. She lived at the fault line of history, where ancient faith met modern empire. The temples she restored would soon be repurposed. The language she spoke would fade. The library she cherished would vanish in flame. But her legend endured, in art, in poetry, in the restless imagination of every age that followed. She is more than a woman of history. She is Egypt's last reflection, the human face of eternity. The Nile flowed beneath her window the day she died, quiet and unchanged. Empires would come and go, but the river would remember. And in that endless current, Cleopatra's story still drifts. The final sigh of an ancient dream, carried forever on the waters of time. Night settles over the Nile. The river glows beneath a pale crescent moon, its surface carrying the mirrored light of 1,000 forgotten suns. The temples lie in shadow. The statues no longer speak. Yet even in silence, Egypt endures. 3,000 years have passed since the first stone was laid at Saqqara, since the first prayer was whispered to the morning sun. The pharaohs are dust, the gods have changed their names, but the dream they built, the longing for eternity, still lingers like perfume in the desert air. The weight of time, civilizations rise, flourish, and fade, yet Egypt never truly vanished. It did not collapse like an empire. It transformed like a spirit moving through ages. The Greeks learned from her architects, the Romans from her priests. Even as sand buried the temples and winds erased the names of kings, the essence of Egypt, the search for balance, beauty, and meaning, flowed on like the river itself. Every culture that came after would inherit a fragment of her thought, the geometry of her builders, the medicine of her healers, the poetry of her tombs. Even our calendars, our clocks, our concept of the soul, all carry echoes of the Nile. Time, the destroyer, became her servant. Rediscovery. For centuries after Cleopatra, Egypt slept beneath the dust. Her cities fell silent. Her writing became mystery. Travelers passed among the ruins, wondering what race of giants had built them. Then, in 1799, soldiers of Napoleon uncovered a black slab of stone near Rosetta, inscribed in 3 scripts: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. It was the key to a language long forgotten. 2 decades later, Jean-François Champollion unlocked its code. For the first time in 2,000 years, the voices of the pharaohs were heard again. They spoke not of conquest, but of continuity, of harvests, hymns, and offerings of bread and beer. Egypt rose once more, not in empire, but in memory. The gifts of Egypt. Look around our modern world, and you can still see her reflection. In every obelisk that rises in a modern city, Paris, London, New York, a silent echo of Heliopolis. In the architecture of columns and capitals, the language of symmetry that whispers of Karnak. In museums where mummies lie beneath glass, their faces painted with eyes that still look beyond death. But her truest legacy is invisible. The idea that knowledge and faith can coexist, that time can be measured yet transcended, that humanity can leave beauty behind as proof that it once understood the divine. Egypt did not merely build monuments, it built memory itself. The human thread. Behind the names of gods and kings were always people. The scribe bending over a reed pen, shaping hieroglyphs into eternity. The mason cutting limestone beneath the sun, his song echoing off the quarry walls. The mother lighting oil before a small household shrine. The farmer watching the water rise, whispering gratitude to the river. They were the real architects of eternity. Anonymous, patient, faithful. In their quiet labor, they created a civilization that outlived them all. Every statue, every tomb, every line of scripture was a promise. We were here. We mattered. Remember us. The spirit of Ma'at. If there is one idea that binds Egypt across millennia, it is Ma'at, truth, balance, justice, the order that sustains all things. To live in Ma'at was to live in harmony, with nature, with community, with the gods. It was both law and prayer, both architecture and ethics. Even now the concept survives. In our sense of fairness, in the scales of justice, in the belief that the heart must remain light. The Egyptians taught that when the heart was weighed against a feather, only the truthful could pass into eternity. Perhaps that is why their civilization endured so long, because it sought not power alone, but harmony. The eternal river. Stand on the banks of the Nile today, and you will see much as they did. The same sunrise over the eastern cliffs, the same fishermen casting nets at dawn, the same palm groves whispering in the wind. The temples may be ruins, but the rhythm remains. Water, light, stone, and time, the 4 pillars of Egypt's soul, still meet here in quiet perfection. Tourists take photos, scholars translate texts, children play by the water's edge. Life continues, as it always has. The river does not mourn, it remembers. Eternity reimagined. Perhaps the Egyptians were right about eternity, not as endless time, but as endless renewal. Every generation rediscovers them, in museums, in books, in the hush of a desert evening. Each time we speak their names, Khufu, Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Ramses, Cleopatra, we breathe life back into their shadows. They understood something we still chase, that art and memory can outlive flesh, that even as civilizations crumble, the dream within them can endure. We are, in some quiet way, their heirs. Farewell to the Pharaohs. The story of ancient Egypt is not a tragedy. It is a circle, a rising and setting sun, an eternal river returning to its source. From the first farmer who watched the flood, to the last queen who faced the dawn with poison on her lips, they all believed in one truth: that life, death, and rebirth are not opposites, but stages of the same journey. And so their monuments were never tombs. They were promises. Promises that the light would return, that the Nile would rise again, that memory is stronger than time. The sleep of kings. In the valley of the kings, the air is still. The mountains are pale and silent. Beneath them, the pharaohs sleep in painted chambers, stars on their ceilings, prayers on their walls. They do not dream of conquest or gold. They dream of the river, of sunlight on stone, of the whisper of reeds. And perhaps, if you listen closely, you can hear them, not as ghosts, but as a lullaby carried by the wind. We are not gone. We are the dust beneath your feet, the water in your veins, the names you still remember. Epilogue: the immortal light. History has many empires, but only one eternity. Egypt endures not because of its monuments, but because it taught the world what monuments mean. That beauty is an act of faith, that memory is sacred, and that the search for eternity begins within the human heart. As the night deepens and the desert cools, the Nile gleams under the stars, a thread of light winding through darkness, endless, patient, alive. And in that light, faint but unwavering, the voice of Egypt still whispers, "I have seen the sun rise 10,000 times. I will see it rise again." End of documentary. 2 hours total runtime. A journey through 3,000 years of time, from the first kings to the last queen, and beyond the horizon of memory itself. The sun sets over the Nile, but our stories never truly end. Subscribe and stay with us for more journeys across forgotten empires, quiet kings, and the whispers of time. Sleep well, and may history find you again at dawn.